Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the next in the series of Thomas Frost Executive Conversations. Joining us today from the Philippines is Rufus Pinto. Rufus will be moving into the role of head of country for the Philippines once the various regulatory approvals have taken place. But previously was country head for Laos, Kiribati, Vanuatu. Now, I've had the pleasure of knowing Rufus for nearly 20 years, having actually introduced him to his first bank in Australia, and then again into ANZ nearly 10 years ago. Rufus, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So far in our conversation series, we've learned a bit about the pandemic response to Australia through the US. I'm interested in your perspective through the geographies that you've come to call home over the course of the last 7 or 8 years.
The pandemic has been a real health crisis, as everybody has termed it, and it's rightly so, right? I could talk about the last geography, which is Laos, right? So Laos was very close. It bordered China. It was very close to the action where it all began. And I must admit that the government took really right actions very swiftly and very, promptly to kind of curtail any spread within Laos, because China shares the land borders with Laos as well. So it's not only by air that people come in, but also by land borders. And it also borders, a couple of other surrounding countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar, all of which were impacted because they also share a border with China to some extent. So I must say that Laos took actions very quickly. I think there are about 21, 22 cases from last count that I've seen. So it's not quite bad. It's been really, really well managed.
Yes.
So what happened also was the timing of it. When the situation broke out, Laos was getting into the Lao New Year, which is a very auspicious time for them. And they tend to have a bit of a break. The government then announced that, you kind of have a 3-week lockdown. So the initial phase itself, when it first hit up, and it started spreading, there was a lockdown. So that kind of curtailed most of it. And then the borders were locked. So that helped no other outside person coming into the country. And then the country was kind of, kept into a bubble as such. And it kept operating quite normally, I must say, to a large extent. We at ANZ took all the right actions. And also because of our network, we were able to hear and listen and learn from our countries. Like China went in first, and then you had the action spread into Hong Kong, Singapore, and we were able to learn very quickly as to what were the steps they took, and and that kind of spread very quickly. So we had pretty much able to have 100% of our staff work from home. We had a few critical staff going into office. We were able to manage our customers, which is our absolute priority. But our topmost priority with all of this was our people. Our people's health and safety, their comfort, their concerns were addressed and very quickly managed.
That's impressive, considering we think of highly industrialized nations like the UK, the US, Australia, obviously, as having very easy access to technology, and the role that technology has played probably in supporting us through this pandemic in terms of connecting with our staff, connecting with our family and friends, even down to online shopping and other retail factors, which not only help keep us sane, but help support the economy. What solutions have you seen in the face of lockdowns and isolations in the broader sort of modus operandi for the developing countries that still perhaps don't have as widespread access to that technology?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and very right in terms of saying that these countries and the people do not have access. I mean, there are lots of other factors as well you compare to the developed nations, and I'm not wanting to draw a big comparison here, but just basic things like the number of people in the house, the family sizes in their houses, the size of the houses, the access to Wi-Fi, the access to basic important necessities in hot countries like Laos as well, where the temperatures are anywhere from 35 to 38 degrees during the day, no air conditioning, right? Working in all of those conditions has been quite challenging for people. But what's very visible in my experience working in developing nations versus my experience working in Australia was, and that's not to say people in Australia are not adaptable, but people in these developing nations are very resilient, because they are used to either climatic conditions, government turbulences, lots of other issues that happen, and they just pick up and go because they've got to look after their families. They're not really wealthy, so that whole resilience piece is a lot more stronger, is what I've observed in these developing nations compared to the developed countries, if you say. So in access to the technology piece, for example, I believe the government in Laos had turns. There was one computer which was accessed by 2 or 3 people, and they took turns to go into office. So they kind of managed and looked at other alternatives of ways to adapt to the situation that was there. So that's essentially how they kind of managed it.
Have you had any oversight of how the Kiribati government has supported its citizens with these sorts of lockdown measures? Have you seen Vanuatu or with how they've supported their citizens as well? Do you know what the situation is on the ground over there?
I guess the blessing for the Pacific was that the spread of the virus was quite curtailed very quickly, because they're so vulnerable. Some of those countries can be really vulnerable to this because of hospital facilities, medical facilities, ability to even fly out of the country. I mean, I think this situation has changed, but when I was in Kiribati, there were only 2 flights a week that you could leave out the country in, right? So those are absolute challenges. But I guess again, those governments took the right steps, is what I heard, in terms of locking down the countries, locking down the borders. So the spread of the virus has not been very rampant there, fortunately, which is really a blessing for those countries.
Yeah.
But in Laos, for example, like I already mentioned about the government and the steps the government took, but from an ANZ perspective, I guess we also took a lot of lead part in educating some of the local banks and how we manage a BCP scenario, which is the business continuity plan scenario, and what could they learn from us. And that's certainly working with the regulator in helping spread the knowledge and help each other in these times. I guess that's what we did as well there.
That's fantastic. A lot of the countries that you've worked in the last few years, Rufus, would be considered countries that are transitioning their economies from a more agricultural-based economy into manufacturing or services industries. Probably Kiribati and Vanuatu more so. Manila or the Philippines is probably further down that track. Do you think the pandemic is likely to have an impact on the direction of that transition, or do you think it's purely a timing thing and they will continue on exactly the same journey, just delayed by 6 or 12 months?
That's also a very interesting question. If I take a step back and I think about this, right? These countries all have key drivers of their GDP. Let me take Kiribati, for example, and this is from my experience 3 years ago, three and a half years ago at least. Fishing was one of the major drivers of the GDP revenue, which is a natural resource, right? Then you take Vanuatu, tourism was one of the key drivers there. You take Laos. Laos has a combination of hydropower, electricity that they sell to the nation's mining, as well as agriculture. So those are the kind of bases of Laos. Philippines, I'm very new here, so I've got to be very careful with what I say here. But essentially, it is the service center offering to the globe or to the world that the economy kind of runs on. So if you notice, each of these countries have a key driver for their GDP, right? And the pandemic obviously stems or begs the question, tourism can't work at this point in time. There are no flights. People are not willing to move in. So there is a different avenues that people need to start thinking about. Now, the scale and the pace at which people will change or the governments will change will obviously be different in different countries, right? Kiribati will continue because it's at the sea, it's fishing. So I guess, not a lot of impact, I would think, and I could be wrong. Vanuatu certainly would be impacted. Tourism is the key driver there. But then what do? They then go back to agriculture probably, and they've got coffee as well, which they kind of, or kava that they export as well. So there are other factors that they could look at in terms of, supporting those industries and investing. At these times, my belief is organizations that invest, governments that invest during these times will come out stronger at the end of this, because they are then investing into technology, they're investing into capabilities, and they're investing into drivers of the future, I guess. And that's very important because the world needs to adapt.
Yeah, great answer. What is ANZ doing to support its staff in these geographies?
What did ANZ do? So in 2015, I guess we came up with this work from home flexible arrangements, for our employees. And at that time, the question that we asked ourselves when people challenged it was, working from home is why not?
Yes, I remember.
It's very interesting. Also, the other day I was in a conference, in our internal conferences, and one of the comments made by one of the senior leaders was when they speak to their colleagues in Europe, they talk about collaboration spaces. They don't talk about offices, right? And the collaboration spaces could be an office, could be a coffee shop. It's where people come together to work and to engage, and that's similarly the attitude that, our leader, Shane Elliott, has taken within the ANZ group is to why do people come to work? What makes them productive at work? Understanding that, and hence he ensured that we had a framework in mind, and that framework was more to firstly protect, then to adapt, then to engage, and then to prepare, and that's essentially the phases that we're going through. So having that framework has really helped us internally. Also, from a health and safety perspective, we've ensured we've done a lot of things. We've got a Healthy Me digital app. We've got a Stay Active digital app. We've got employee assistance programs. We talk to our people regularly. One of our leaders also made this comment, very rightfully so, is to being mindful of having long meetings when you're, on these video conferences, because people's days are a lot longer than they used to be at offices. So just being aware of their mental state. They've got shows at home. I was talking to one of my staff or my future staff here, and they were saying, look, we have a 10-month-old. I don't have help at the moment, which it's quite common in Manila to have help like nannies or whatever. I can't get them in because of COVID. My husband's working, I'm working. We've got to look after the 10-month-old, and we've got to do the housework. So all of these things really add on as really real life examples, and as leaders, we really, really need to be very present in the moment as far as our employees' needs, our people's needs are concerned. So I'm very pleased with the way ANZ has gone about it, and and we've really taken all the right actions in my view.
What's the current situation on the ground in the Philippines, or in Manila specifically? From what I understand, you're back in a fairly strict lockdown, at least for now. How are things there?
So Manila, as I understand it, is considered as one of the longest lockdowns in the world, right? We've been almost now since March, 5.5 months in lockdown. Basically, right? So just different degrees of lockdowns. They have different terminologies. At the moment, we are in general community quarantine, GCQ as they call it, and there are parts of the country that are probably more modified or enhanced community quarantine, and all of those kind of terminologies that we have. Sure. So Manila has been in a lockdown for a long time, but that does not stop us from doing day-to-day work. Obviously, I'm still back in my service apartment waiting for my work permits to do any productive work. But in the meanwhile, what I see from my apartment window or whatever is cars are now starting to come back onto the roads, and my people or the people in the office are starting to come in, but they're trying to take shifts. That leads us to probably the discussion of where the future of work is going to be, right? And that's a very interesting discussion as well.
Absolutely. So that's a concept that we discussed in the first of these conversations, which was around the accelerated adaptation, and will we return to how things were pre-virus? And the general consensus seems to be probably not quite the same, but we'll head back towards that direction. Do you anticipate within these transitional economies a greater reliance and availability of technology to support these sorts of practices going forward?
See, technology, overnight, you could say, I think I read somewhere where Zoom's profits had doubled or tripled or whatever. I'm not sure. I don't quote me here. But what I'm basically trying to say is technology is an amazing feat, right? I mean, when we talk about technology and the way we're currently working, is this something that we've just managed because of the pandemic? And probably the answer is no. This was inevitable. This is going to happen, but this has probably expedited the way we kind of manage things, right? I mean, like I mentioned about the collaboration spaces earlier, this is a virtual collaboration space. So this is just expedited that. In these developing nations, I guess you're right. I mean, technology still requires a lot of investments, and we've got to be very careful with technology as well. As you probably have heard, I know in Australia, the Prime Minister came out and said about, hackers and scamming and all of those kind of things that we need to be careful of, and constantly remind our staff and educate them about clicking on things and, phishing emails and all of those kind of things. Now, if you can imagine, that would be really amplified in these developing nations. So yes, they have those challenges as such as well. And I guess time will tell how people will come off those challenges. But in my view, everybody's resilient and everybody needs to come out of it, and everybody will find a way, in my view. Probably that's my optimistic self saying it.
So Rufus, look, thank you very, very much. I think we've again touched on some consistent themes of technology and adaptation. But it sounds like what you're seeing and your view of this is that in a lot of these developing nations, it's really the resilience and the ability to adapt and to adapt again that they've developed over the years through various circumstances that have been thrown at them, whether it's cyclones, whether it's political instabilities, whether it's just general environmental conditions. Is there anything that you'd like to add to this conversation, Rufus? Is there anything you'd like to sum up with?
Oh, look, thank you, firstly, for the opportunity. You is what I want to say at the end out here. But right, I guess the differences that I probably observed are the resilience and the ability to kind of keep moving and finding new ways. And I guess the whole world is doing that. So I cannot just categorize that as just the developing nation or the developed nation. It's the whole world is doing this. I think the degree to which this is probably different in every nation, right? I mean, when you spoke about issues and adaptations by the developing nation people, they've also had health issues in the past. They've got SARS in the past that they had, right? So they had that. They had the financial crisis out here. So they've had both health crisis as well as financial crisis. And this kind of brings out more a culmination of the two, I suppose, where the health crisis has driven the financial crisis. I guess people are becoming more resilient, more aware, working together, learning from each other. And it's great to see the world shaping the way it is, and it's great for the environment. I mean, the lockdowns have certainly helped the environment as well. So I guess that's a big plug for that. So you have positivity. There's always positivity in everything, and thank you so much again for the opportunity for doing this and having a chat with you.
Rufus, it's been great to catch up again. I always feel just a little bit smarter after talking to you. So thank you very much again. And we'll be back in the next week or so with the next Thomas Frost Executive Conversation series. But for now, Rufus, lovely to see you again. And thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you.